All right, so the Instagram live feed is rolling, so we're just waiting for the little 2-minute Blog Talk Radio British lady to get going, and we'll roll with it. Let me bring the volume of my computer too, so I can hear you a little more. There we go.
1 minute until showtime.
Oh, there she goes, the British bitch.
That's right. We need to give her a name.
We should give her a name. You know, like, we gotta stop calling her the Blog Talk Radio British bitch. Like, we gotta come up with like Susan? I don't know. Susan sounds like a classy name for her.
I was trying to think of a British name like Gertrude.
Gertrude. There we go. Margaret. That's a good name for
her. Definitely.
Well, we got 1 minute. For those that are watching on Instagram, we're not live on Blog Talk yet, so we got about 60 seconds before the podcast starts going, and the intro music starts rolling, and we'll get into things, man.
Very good. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Got a couple people tuned in on the Instagram live feed already, so here we go.
5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Alright folks, welcome to episode 5 of the ScrapYard podcast. You're listening to Mitch Ciccarelli. I got my boy Todd Jackson on the line, and I promise one day soon we will get some intro music that actually doesn't sound like hot garbage. one of these days. And actually, if you're listening to the show and you know how to make some like good, like, you know, badass like podcast jingles, hit me up because we're definitely on the market for one. But anyway, we're doing the podcast a day early due to the holidays coming up. We're actually going to be on a 2-week hiatus due to Christmas and all that good stuff and you know, things coming up. But I wanted to get a podcast out of the way to break down this UFC 219 card. It's a stacked pay-per-view. We're also going to talk about a couple of other hot topics in the mixed martial arts industry as well. But before we get into that, Todd, you know, how was your week, brother? Anything crazy and exciting happening?
Not a whole lot, man. You know, started a new job this week, working for Intuit, so that's a huge deal for me and my family. So kind of a positive week for me, and just been paying attention to a lot of the news going on. And I will say, I know it's not MMA related, you and I touched on it, but I'm a huge Yankees fan, man. I grew up back east, and today one of the biggest trades that's happened in probably a decade took place, or at least it's being put together, that John Collins Stanton, the National League MVP, is being traded from the Miami Marlins to the New York Yankees.
Wow.
Which is really big news in the sporting world. That's like the Babe Ruth deal. It's huge.
Yeah.
So that's a big feather in my cap. A couple weeks before Christmas, man. Star Wars is coming out next week. Dude, I couldn't be in a better place right now.
I'm with you, brother. Man, I'm looking forward to that Star Wars movie. You know, ever since the one they did, what was it, 2016, the last one that they did, man? So many unanswered questions. I'm like, man, I'm ready for the next one. Hopefully Luke Skywalker's in this movie for longer than 5 minutes. You know, but
yeah, I'm hoping that he doesn't get taken out, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's the thing. I mean, it seems like if you watch the previews, it seems like he's got a pretty big role in it, but I don't know. They tend to throw loops here, you know, in our faces and kind of, you know, throw some tricks in there. But it should be good, man. I'm with you, man. I'm a big Star Wars fan and definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm like a little kid in a candy store right now. Everything's going my way, so couldn't be happy. The show's doing good. We got a lot of people supporting us, and you know, I would just like to say, you know, I know you have the same feelings I do towards our fans and the people that are supporting us. We can't thank you enough, and it's just great to see us, you know, gaining traction. So
it's awesome, man. You know, it's really cool to see that the podcast has taken off in such a short period of time. I mean, we're only about a month into this thing. And already we're starting to get a lot of people interested in coming on the show. A lot of people, big fans of what we're doing. I want to give a shout out to all the folks that are watching on my live Instagram feed right now. Got about 10, well, there was 10, now there's about 6 people that are tuned in. Maybe we lost them when we started talking about Star Wars. But anyway, we got the best fans in the world, and it just keeps growing. But, man, let's get right into some mixed martial arts, man. Of course, tonight we got a UFC Fight Night card in Fresno. The main event, really interesting main event between featherweights Cub Swanson and Brian Ortega. I got to be honest with you, man, this is UFC matchmaking at its finest. You know, you got the veteran, the tough, gritty veteran in Cub Swanson, who's just always been at the top of the food chain in the featherweight division, has not gotten a title shot, but has always been like top, 5, top 6. Had a couple losses to the, guys like Frankie Edgar, Max Holloway, the current champion, no shame there. But Ortega is on the rise, 26-year-old phenom. I believe he is undefeated with 1 no contest. And this guy, in my opinion, has probably the best ground game in the featherweight division. I think if he gets past Cub Swanson here, he's definitely going to be close to being next in line for Holloway. But Todd, what's your take on this one? Not a lot of big name fights on this Fight Night card, but I'm definitely pumped up for that main event. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I really am intrigued by this main event. I mean, this is a pay-per-view worthy fight, and it's a great card or fight to headline a card for free on Fox Sports 1. So they did a great job putting this one at the peak. I will say, for me personally, a couple of fights that I am excited about. Cris, he fights out of the MMA lab. Then you got Frankie Saenz out of Fight Ready. They're both competing tonight. These are guys who I've had the opportunity to see up close and personal, and really looking forward to seeing their fights just on a personal level. That being said, though, when we talk about this main event, man, something that really stands out to me, and I love these types of fights where you got an old lion and a young lion. You know what I mean? You got Brian Ortega, who's a young kid on the rise, and a guy like Cub Swanson, who's been kicking ass since the days of WEC, and really hasn't slowed down. I mean, he's always been able to, I don't want to say reinvent himself, because he's always been successful, but, breathe through some of these difficult times in his career where, you take a loss to Frankie Edgar, you don't hang your head. I mean, it's Frankie Edgar. You're going to fight with Frankie Edgar, there's a good chance you're going to lose. I mean, it's to say Cub Swanson couldn't have won that fight or the other ones he lost, but, it's like you said, no shame in losing to him. So, Cub Swanson, such a dynamic striker, that's something that always stood out to me, very creative. And then you got Brian Ortega. It's almost like one of those classics where you would think that the strength of the striker versus the grappler. Can Ortega, take Cub Swanson down on the ground and put him in a difficult position, or is the savvy veteran going to be able to avoid that and impose his will on his kid? So yeah, man, it's a very intriguing fight. I'm going to lean towards Cub just because I feel like he's due. You know what I mean? He's due for that opportunity,
right.
And he's got a lot of experience under his belt, and that always plays big for me, is having not being taken back by the moment. Now, do I think Brian Ortega is going to be overwhelmed by it? No, I don't. But yeah, man, I'm really looking forward to it. It's always fun to watch these cards where you see a bunch of names that you don't necessarily recognize, and you and I talked about this at length with the fight purists, right? I don't give a shit who's fighting. If you're going to put some gloves on and play punch face, I'm in, man. I'll watch it.
Hell yeah, man. And Cub Swanson. So I just actually found out recently he's married to Kenda Perez, who used to host the Best of Pride series on Spike TV back in the day when the UFC was with Spike.
Yeah.
And I got to give Cub a fist bump for that one, man. Kenda's gorgeous. I remember years ago I had her on one of my old podcasts, which this podcast was very short-lived. Not a lot of people remember it. The name of the podcast was probably the worst name in the history of a podcast. It was called MMA Mass Debation Radio. And I was the only host of it, and I would bring on like ring card girls and females that have that like sex appeal that are associated with mixed martial arts. It was bad. It was to be young and dumb. But anyway, she's a good person. I wanted to just mention that because if you marry Kenda Perez, then you definitely have it made. So looking forward to that fight. One thing I want to bring up, and I hate that we always bring up this fucking guy, Conor McGregor. It's hard not to because he's such a synonymous name with combat sports these days. Apparently, there's talk going on that he's going to be taking on another boxing fight with Manny Pacquiao. Now, I have kind of mixed emotions about this, and we've talked about this a lot in previous podcasts. I want to see McGregor defend that lightweight title against Tony Ferguson, but if he's not going to do that, he's got to vacate the title or be stripped of it. I'm not too against the idea of him boxing Pacquiao because part of me kind of wants to see that. I'm not going to lie. Like, part of me is like, that might be kind of fun. But then, of course, there's the purist side, which is what we're all about, and it's like, he's got to either defend the title first and then do that fight, or vacate it. It just, the lightweight division is probably the most stacked weight class in mixed martial arts today, but it's suffering when you have a champion that's refusing to defend the title against anybody but big names. It's just it's crazy, man. But what's your take on this? Do you think this is a possibility, or do you think this is just kind of like combat sports rumors, just trying to get clickbait?
I saw it, I heard about it, and if there's one thing that I learned, I remember years ago, I used to always be that guy. I was always that dude that when you start talking about George St. Pierre fighting Josh Koscheck or Thiago Alves, I was like, Thiago Alves could be the guy to do it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I always found a way to doubt George St. Pierre. Not that I didn't believe in him, but I wanted to see him tested. And even with the Matt Serra knockout, I'm digressing here, but he wasn't tested, he just got caught.
Right.
Where I'm coming from is I learned not to doubt George St. Pierre over time. You know what I mean? You say that enough times and you try to convince yourself this is the time it's going to happen, and it just never happens. So if there's one thing I've learned, and it was a lesson I learned with the Mayweather thing, was that you cannot doubt Conor McGregor. If this man decides that he wants to do something, he finds a way to do it. There was a time when people were talking about Mayweather versus McGregor, and I spit on it. I was like, you're an idiot. You're a fucking moron, dude. There's no way that's going to happen. And it happened. I mean, it took a while, but it happened, and I sat there with my $100 paper, and I watched the son of a bitch. So at the end of the day, do I want this fight to happen? I don't like it. I mean, is it something I'll watch? Absolutely. Do I think it matters? Absolutely not. Does it matter if Conor McGregor, after coming off his first boxing debut, getting TKO'd by Mayweather, turns around and flips that into another $100 million fight with Manny Pacquiao? It means bullshit, dude. It amounts to nothing.
Right.
It has entertainment value, but even if he knocks Manny Pacquiao out or something crazy happens, Conor McGregor is not a boxer. I mean, he didn't spend 40 fights building up his brand as a boxer. He is using his brand for mixed martial arts and taking it into that boxing realm, which to me, I feel like you've got to give back to MMA, because without MMA, Conor McGregor ain't shit. I mean, from a publicity standpoint, I mean, Conor McGregor could have done anything he wanted to do, I'm sure. But where I'm coming from is, to your point, you got Tony Ferguson sitting over here at 155 pounds with a strap around his waist that feels a little lighter because it's an interim title. It doesn't hold the same weight that it would if it was Conor's belt. And Tony Ferguson deserves an opportunity to fight Conor McGregor and prove what a bad taste is that going to leave in Tony Ferguson's mouth if Conor McGregor goes and fights Pacquiao, puts another $100 million in the bank, and decides it's hard to get out of silk sheets and go do road work. I think is what I think it was Marvin Hagler said that. You know, I mean, at what point does he lose the desire to compete and then not give that opportunity to a guy who's thirsty to say, can I beat this fucking guy? Can I beat Conor McGregor? I think I can,
right.
But you never get the opportunity to do it. What a slap in the face to Tony, man. So I would prefer, just as a fan, as a purist, I would prefer that Conor come home and do what he needs to do. But I don't think it's going to happen. If they even sniff that this is a possibility, Conor, he's not coming back to the UFC, I don't think.
I'm with you, man. I'm of the belief that, to be the man, you have to kind of beat the man. As who said that? Ric Flair said that, of all people. But it's true. Like, I don't like seeing, right? Yeah, we'll just throw out a woo for old time's sake. But I'm not big on guys like winning titles and then, there's an interim belt because the champ is not defending it, and then that champion never comes back. And then you have a guy that was interim champion, that becomes the undisputed champion based off of the fact that the actual champion didn't want to fight. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, he's the champion, but like, would he have beaten the guy that didn't actually defend the belt? And it's kind of the same thing right now with middleweight. Although I think there's no question Robert Whittaker would have beaten GSP. I think he probably would have. But it's just, here's the thing, man. Like, and we talked about this on Facebook. We got into a little bit of an argument with a couple of folks that were big defenders of this GSP thing with him vacating the title. But this is my take. He never should have been allowed to come back after 4 years and get thrusted into a title fight in a division that he has never fought in. Now, if it would have been welterweight, I would have understood, because the guy left as welterweight champion. You know, he never lost that title, even though Johnny Hendricks' case could be made, he beat him, but judges saw it otherwise. He never lost that title, so I would have had no problem with GSP coming back and getting right in there with Tyron Woodley. But they said they wanted to do Bisping, and I'm just like, this doesn't make much sense. And I'm thinking, like, well, maybe George, maybe he's just put on so much weight that he's just he's moving up to middleweight and he wants to do new things there. But then you come to find out that he just picked Bisping because he saw it pretty much as a winnable fight, as style-wise. I don't want to say an easy fight, because Michael Bisping's not an easy fight for anybody, but style-wise, he was like, okay, I have a better chance at beating Michael Bisping right now than I would coming down and beating Tyron Woodley. And that's all well and good. But after you win the belt, at least defend it at least one time. Like, for him to just win the title and then just say, oh, I'm sick now, and, you know, and granted, I give the guy props. He at least was classy enough to not hold up the division any longer. He immediately vacated, which is not what McGregor's doing. So I give the guy a little bit of props for that. But it's like, man, like, I'm not a fan of it. You know, I mean, yeah, it's cool to have that feather in your cap. He's the fourth guy in history to win titles in 2 different weight classes. But it just seems so obvious that what he was doing. You know what I mean? And then you got people that are like, oh, well, no, he's just sick right now, and he's just... No, like, this guy has been trying to find a way to avoid fighting Whitaker, to avoid fighting guys like Rockhold, because he knows they're bigger than him, and he knows they're going to put a hurting on him, and, you know, it's not his weight class. Welterweight is his weight class, but he just never should have been in there against Bisping. But what do you think, man? Because obviously we got heated with a couple of guys on Facebook the other day about this same issue.
Well, I'll tell you what I think, and to kind of touch on a few different points, when you start with the discussion we were having the other night, I feel like there's 2 different layers of true fans. Like, you got your casual fans who, you know, walk down past 5 urinals to stand next to you and tell you Conor McGregor's the best ever. But, you've seen that meme out there. But the thing is, you know, you've got, when you come to your purists, your hardcore fans that know what the fuck they're talking about, I feel like there's 2 different types. There are the very realists, and a lot of these people are in journalism, and I think that's part of the problem with why we're sitting here talking today, as far as, like, we want to see something different, we want to hear something different, we want to say something different, then, hey, it's business, man. It's a business. Well, it's not a business.
Right.
You don't take a popular team like the Dallas Cowboys and put them in a Super Bowl just because people like them.
Exactly.
They have to win. They have to earn it, right? You could put the Yankees in the World Series every fucking year. That doesn't mean they deserve to be there, but that doesn't mean people wouldn't watch it. So, I mean, it is a business. I get that. But there has to be some legitimacy to it, and that's the 2 different sides of fans. You get a lot of guys out there that are like, hey, they had a plan here in place. I even read an article today on MMA Junkie. GSP doesn't know us anything. Bullshit. Bullshit, he doesn't know us anything. You know what, man? We made GSP rich.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? We did. We're the fucking guys that buy the pay-per-views every month. We're the guys that put this thing, made it so popular. Popularity comes from the fans, not from the fighters.
Preach it.
And I'm not taking that away from them, but without us, who are they going to fight for? And MMA is not exactly the NFL. I mean, there's not people, you know, climbing over each other to get to these shows or to buy these pay-per-views. We're a very select group of people. GSP owes us everything. So in that respect, did you make this plan to approach Michael Bisping because that was the low-hanging fruit, so to speak? And to your point, if that's the case, then you should have stayed at home, man. I like GSP. I have a lot of respect for GSP, and I, to your point, I very much respect the way he went about this, as far as just saying, hey, nope, not today, I'm done, and that's very admirable. But the process, I feel like a lot of it went on behind the scenes with the UFC, and I've got no facts to back that up, but we've seen the writing on the wall with this company for years,
right,
how they do things. So, you know, did they map this out? I think that was the case. Had GSP lost that fight, you know, he probably would have relinquished back to welterweight, but now that he won, they had to take a different path. You know, maybe they expect him to win, I don't know. But it reminds me of Randy Couture. Do you remember when Tim Sylvia was cracking everybody around and Randy Couture sitting cage side, and he's like, if nobody else can fucking do this, I'm going to have to get in here and kick this guy's ass for these people. And he stepped up to heavyweight. He whooped the shit out of Tim Sylvia. Even though he didn't really belong at heavyweight, we know who swing the tour, right? It's GSP, right? They can do what they want.
Right.
But, he stayed. But he fought fucking Brock Lesnar, man. You know what I mean? He stuck around and fought a dude he had no business fighting.
Yep.
And, he did it right. So there's layers to it for me. And I would like to have seen a different path from the get-go than the path that was taken. I agree with you. I feel like welterweight, okay, you get that opportunity, the title. But to just thrust a guy who's never competed in the division before into a title match for the sake of saying he's a two-time or a two-division champ, it doesn't hold the same weight. He's not a division champ. He didn't fight his way to that title. He hasn't defended the title. How many fighters will tell you, how many champions will tell you if you ask them, you're not a champ until you defend the number one contender, against the number one contender. There's so many things that you could say about it that I could argue with someone about it all day. Do I see it? I get it. I get what they're saying. I get where they're coming from. But bullshit, GSP owes us everything. And if we want to see him defend his title, he needs to defend the title. If he can't do that, I get it. But then you shouldn't have chased in the first place if you never had any intention of holding it. I can't respect that part of it. But it's GSP, he's a legend, so I tip my cap. I'm wearing a fucking GSP shirt right now, dude.
Dude, I'm with you, man. That spot on, 100%. And speaking of guys getting title shots that haven't really, kind of earned them in the old school sense. So Nate Diaz, this guy is interesting, man. So we all know the UFC was trying to make that fight happen with him and Tyron Woodley, which made absolutely no sense. Diaz does not compete in the 170 division. He's not ranked in 170. He's not even barely ranked at 155. The guy hasn't won a fight since the first McGregor fight back in 2015 or 16. But apparently they just keep offering him title shots because they know he's a name. They know he's somebody that, they think they can do something with pay-per-view wise, right? But he keeps turning them down. And he put a tweet out the other day, and I don't get this guy, man. Like, when he types as if he's like a 14-year-old high school girl that's trying to act ghetto. Like, he reminds me of like that girl that was on the what do you call that? The Dr. Phil show that was like, "Cash me outside, how about that?" Like, that's fucking Nate Diaz. Like, this fucking guy gets on Twitter and he's like, "Yeah, the UFC keep offering me title shots, but I'm cool." Like, cool spelled Kool. Like, come on, bro. Like, you can't fucking spell cool the right way. Like, give me a fucking break. And he's like, I'm time to move on to the next sport. I'm like, okay, whatever, Nate. Like, nobody gives a fuck. Like, you know what I mean? But I had to bring that up. What did you see that tweet from this guy? Like, is this really him typing this, or does he have like some 14-year-old that manages his Twitter account? Like, it blows my mind, man.
No, I did see the tweet, and you're right. I mean, he and his brother both have always kind of had that ghetto appeal. And I don't say that disrespectfully. I know a lot of people from tough neighborhoods, but at the same time, it's like it's almost like they embrace it a little too much, And I feel like here's something I guess I probably shouldn't divert into Nick. But something that I've always noticed about Nick is he's not the most articulate person in the world.
Right.
But the content of what he's saying is really powerful. Like, when he talks about fighting, I remember watching a video of him talking about all these UFC or MMA fighters going into boxing gyms to work on their striking, and just the embarrassment that he had that these guys wouldn't put shoes on when they step in the ring, boxing shoes.
Yeah.
He's like, these boxers look at you like a clown when you walk into a gym, get in a ring with no shoes on, and start, throwing around, 14-ounce gloves. So it's weird because Nate doesn't have that same appeal where, sure, he has a kind of a street sense to him. He's not the most articulate guy in the world, but the content isn't always compelling either, So, I caught the tweet. I was like, I was more kind of taken back by the on to the next sport thing. And I think that a lot of these fighters, they see that even though MMA is, I would say, and again, we're biased, right? But I would say MMA is more popular than boxing in today's age.
Yeah.
Pound for pound, side by side. You put an MMA fight on one side of a bar and a boxing match on the other side of the bar, you're going to have more people on one side than the other, and I think that's the MMA side. Is that a generational thing? I don't know. But, I'm not taking anything away from the sweet science. I know a lot of people who are pure boxers, purist boxers, and people that really love that sport, so I get it. But you see what Conor did, and he went over and crossed over and made all this money and made a spectacle of it. I think that these guys feel like that's something that anybody can do. And I've seen other guys talk about it, even at a local level. I've seen guys like, I'm just going to go to boxing.
Right.
Well, you're not Conor McGregor. You're not going to sell it like he did.
Exactly.
And, Nate Diaz is a big name to you and I, but you put 14-ounce red gloves on Nate Diaz and put him in a boxing ring, nobody gives a shit.
Yep.
You know what I mean? No boxing purist is going to buy a ticket because it's Nate Diaz. I think he's misreading the writing on the wall, and if that's his intent, I think it's a mistake. He made his name in MMA, and again, here I am saying it's not me. I said it on Condit 2 years ago. I mean, MMA is where he belongs, so that's where he's great.
I'm with you, man. Well, we're going to get right into the UFC 219 pay-per-view card. That's coming up December 30th. So we're kind of breaking this thing down early, like we mentioned at the start of the podcast. We're going on a 2-week hiatus after the show. So I'm actually flying to Ohio to spend Christmas with my family and stuff like that. And I know, Todd, you got a lot of stuff going on as well. So we'll be on break for a little bit. So I did want to cover UFC 219 just so we don't miss that. This is a really good card, man. I do want to talk about one prelim fight on that card before we get into the pay-per-view. And I don't know if this fight is even still happening or not. I really sincerely hope that it is. And I'm talking about that welterweight fight between Kamaru Usman and Emil Meek. You know, for those who aren't familiar with these two guys, they're fucking killers at 170, especially Kamaru Usman. He was on The Ultimate Fighter, I believe, season 21, the American Top Team versus the Black Zillions. I think he won that show, and then ever since then, he's been tearing it up. And to the point where guys at 170 are kind of hesitant to sign on the dotted line to fight him because he's just smashing everyone. But there's one guy that wants to fight him that was like, hey, I'm ready to go. And that's this crazy fucker, Emil Meek, who's got like Viking blood in him. But the only problem was there was an issue with his visa. He's out there in Norway, I believe. And there was a problem with getting him a visa for this fight. So there was a lot of question marks. There was a lot of, well, will this fight still happen? What's going to go on? And then I think it was like maybe last week or 2 weeks ago, Emil Meek finally got his visa. But now Kamaru Usman's camp is saying, oh, we've already moved on. We're trying to get a bigger fish. They're trying to get a Colby Covington fight, which I don't think is going to happen on a couple weeks away.
That's pretty short notice. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm hoping this fight still happens because, man, style-wise, it should be a barn burner. What's your take on this one, man? What do you think about these two guys? Not big names in the division, but definitely guys to watch out for.
Yeah, absolutely. Both these guys are wrecking machines. I'm kind of looking down their stats right now, and between the two of them, they're both over 50% of their records are KOs or TKOs, almost 80% for Meek. So what that tells me is these guys are coming in slinging leather. They're biting down on their mouthpiece, and they're gonna stand in the pocket and they're gonna trade. That always makes for an exciting fight. Kamaru Usman, ranked number 12 in the division. I mean, if you spent 2-3 months of your life focusing on one guy, and then he has a hiccup trying to get on a plane, that doesn't. I can't see why that would want to change your approach. I mean, you focus for this guy, you train for this guy, right? So why wouldn't you stick to the game plan? It's not like you forgot who you were fighting because he couldn't get on the plane.
Right.
I'd like to see that fight still take place, and hopefully it does. But either way, even if these guys wind up fighting another opponent, I mean, they're both gonna, they're entertaining fighters. So it's it's kind of like the last week we were talking about, Gaethje and Eddie Alvarez. I mean, that's a fight that you just look forward to no matter what the outcome is.
Yeah, man. I mean, I was hoping that this was going to be on the pay-per-view card too, but hopefully it goes down. It's going to be a sick matchup. But getting right into the first fight on the actual main card, you got women's strawweights here. You got the former champion Carla Esparza going up against the undefeated prospect Cynthia Calvillo. I actually tried to get Carla on the show this week. I know she's got a lot going on. Obviously, she's in fight camp. And, it's a very, coming down on, we got like 3 weeks before this fight. So she read my message. She didn't respond. I was kind of bummed because her and I, we go back a little bit. I did a lot of interviews with her before she was in the UFC, before she, got that notoriety. And I feel like when she won that title, she wasn't getting the respect that she deserved. She wasn't getting promoted, like kind of like Amanda Nunes right now. Like the UFC wasn't promoting her much. Right. She lost the belt to Joanna, and then she started fighting on the prelims, which is bizarre, as a former champion. So they're putting her up against Cynthia, and I think this is their reasoning. They see a lot in Cynthia Calvillo. They think she's going to be the next big breakout star, especially for that Hispanic market, that they're really trying to crack down into.
Mm-hmm.
So they're thinking, okay, if she, put her in there with a former champion, Esparza, that'll bump her up the rankings, probably get her into title contention. I'm hoping Esparza kind of shutters their plans, just because I really like Carla Esparza, even though she's shunned me lately. But I'm hoping she can pull this off. Her wrestling is still top of the food chain in that division. But man, I tell you, this Cynthia Calvillo girl she's got it all, and she's just got that kind of killer instinct, mentality. Like, she doesn't give a fuck. Like, she reminds me a lot of Joanna, except not as talented, I don't think. Maybe not yet. I'm hoping Esparza, again, Carla, if you're listening, which she's probably not, I'm hoping you pull it off, but I'm going to pick Cynthia Calvillo by a third-round submission, and I think she might be next in line for Rose Namajunas if she gets this win. What about you, man? How do you see this one going down?
It's an interesting point you made about them digging into the Mexican demographic, and something that the history tells us is, and I feel, I've lived 5 minutes away from the Mexico border, so I see a lot of this. Combat arts is so deeply entrenched in the community, the Hispanic community, both north and south of the border, and so you get certain athletes on board, and the UFC knows this, as you say. The Mexican people, the Latino community is going to rally behind them. I mean, you think of something like Cain Velasquez, right?
Right.
So it's great to see that transition, because you want to talk about, roots and tradition. Boxing goes, Julio Cesar Chavez, it goes on and on. So, yeah, it's cool. It's cool to see someone like that, doing well and represent a certain demographic in Calvillo. She's a very well-rounded fighter, undefeated, so she's got a lot of confidence and momentum behind her. We're talking about a former champ and the Cookie Monster, man. Carla Esparza, no joke. You said it, top of the food chain wrestling. What is always intriguing to me about that top of the food chain wrestling when you're playing with someone who maybe has a submission game is, do you set up your own doom? You know what I mean? If you're going to take someone down, if you're going to shove your head into their waist and drive and pull, are you putting your neck at exposure? Of course you are. So, it's a dangerous game. You got to be conscientious of it, Carla Esparza. So I hope that, in my mind, I think that experience will probably play to Esparza's advantage. She's hungry. She wants to get back off those, undercard fights and back to, the top of the event. So I think I'll go with Carla Esparza for a decision. But who knows, man? Could go either way, right?
For sure, man. Well, the next fight, I'm really pumped up for this one. It's the return of the natural-born killer, Carlos Condit, the former interim UFC welterweight champion, one of the most exciting fighters probably in the history of combat sports. He's back in there, but he's got a tough test against Neil Magny. Now, a lot of people might not be too familiar with Neil Magny. He's a fighter out here in Denver, Colorado, an Ultimate Fighter alumni. He was on, I believe, Tough 16, which was probably the worst tough in the history of the show, and there's been a lot of them, so that says something. But he didn't look that impressive on Tough 16. I remember watching him. He got knocked out by Mike Ricci, and it was a brutal knockout. And after that, I was like, oh, this guy, I'm not going to see much from him. He made a really good run for himself over the past couple of years. Like, he started winning a lot of fights in a row, and he started getting ranked in the top, I think he's in the top 10 of the welterweight division for a very long time. And he got that fight with Damian Maia. And Damian Maia, tough matchup. Maia, beat him, and he started falling from the rankings again. But he's somebody that's like, you don't want to underestimate him. Like, he doesn't kind of have that look like, okay, he's going to be a dangerous guy, but he's got very good stand-up. He's got a really technical ground game as well. He's kind of good everywhere, as most fighters are these days. But it's a tough one for Condit because he's been away for so long. So it's hard to say. Like, is he going to go in there, and is it going to be the Carlos Condit of old that just, like, he was just fucking, like, had this crazy killer instinct about him and just would not quit until he got that TKO? Or are we going to see a different version of Condit that's kind of, ready to retire? Tough to say. I'm hoping for the first one. I'm hoping Condit goes in there and it's a good performance. But, part of me, I got to root for the Denver guys, being out here in Denver. I like Neil Magny a lot, so it would be a big win for him if he could get that. Would definitely be a good way to kind of jumpstart his 2018. I'm going to go with Condit just based off of the Condit that I'm familiar with. But again, it's tough to say. If I had to pick, I'm going to say Condit by maybe a second round TKO, but toss up, man. What about you?
You know, you make a great point with a guy like Magny, who maybe not a lot of people are familiar with. He really caught my attention when he fought Hector Lombard. Hector Lombard, you know, all that, the side stuff aside, that's a human tank. It's like a Sherman tank, man. This guy is a wrecking ball. And Neil Magny was able to knock him out, and he got himself a knockout of the night performance. So over Hector Lombard, that's quite a feather in your cap. And some of his losses, I mean, you look, Lorenz Larkin, no joke. Rafael Dos Anjos, former champion. Then he's got the win over Johnny Hendricks, who's the former champion. So this guy has proved that he can compete at a high level. So don't sleep on Neil Magny, fight fans. That being said, you know, you have to say that. You don't have to say shit about Carlos Condit. This guy is old guard. He's been around forever. He's a master of violence, embracing that where most people would shit their pants. Carlos Condit steps up, man, and walks right into the storm with his chest out. I love him. He's one of my favorite fighters over the years, and just a violent human being. So I'm with you. I feel like there's a TKO somewhere in those 15 minutes. I don't like to go into picking rounds and stuff like that because I have a hard enough getting the choice right, much less when it's going to happen. I'm like a curse for people. If I pick someone to win, man, you can almost bet they're going to lose. I can't gamble for shit. Anyways, I digress. Carlos Condit with the win, TKO type of victory. Neil Magny, great fighter, and I think that he still has a very bright future. But I feel like the guy like Carlos Condit, if we know him the way we think we do and everything that it should be, this is a guy who is starving for competition right now. It's been a while, and he wants to get back in there right now. He'd probably fight today if they'd let him.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's ready. I think I was watching an interview he did with Ariel Helwani on the MMA Hour a couple weeks back. I think actually it was about a month ago, and you can tell he's ready to get back in there. He's got the edge again. But you know, we'll see. I mean, anytime you have a guy that's been in a lot of brutal fights, taking a lot of shots, like we talked about this a few podcasts back, it changes them a little bit. You know, so I don't know if we're still going to see that same guy, you know, but I'm hoping for it because I'm a big Carlos Condit fan. Want to give a shout out to the folks that are still watching on the Instagram live feed. We got a lot of females in here that are giving heart sides, so I like it. I appreciate the support.
They love those tickets to the gun show, man.
You know, man. Oh, my God. I'm flattered. But anyway, the next fight on this pay-per-view, really interesting bantamweight fight. You got Jimmie Rivera against John Lineker. This is a contender matchup, in my opinion. Actually, if it was not for TJ Dillashaw going down and fighting Mighty Mouse, I would probably say the winner of this would be getting a title shot. But I don't know how things are going to play out next year. Jimmie Rivera, this guy is on the rise. Like, he's coming off, I think he beat Uriah Faber, a lot of other ranked guys in that bantamweight division. John Lineker, I believe, is number 5 in that division right now. He's a powerhouse. Like, I love watching this guy fight when he can make weight, which lately he's solved that problem, it seems. But I love watching John Lineker standing and banging. But, man, Jimmie Rivera, I think we're talking about, like, the future of the bantamweight division with Rivera. I see a lot in him. It's tough to pick against Lineker because, like I said, Lineker's got like, middleweight power at bantamweight at 135. Like, that's how fucking powerful he is. But, you know, I think I'm always going to lean towards the technique. I think Rivera's got a little bit more technical prowess in his game. I'm going to go with Rivera by a unanimous decision, but it could go either way. I'm just excited to see how it plays out. Todd, what about you, brother? How do you see this one going down?
I can tell you that what stands out to me with these guys is they're both high-volume strikers. They definitely are not going in there looking to outpoint. I mean, you're going to see more decisions on the side of a guy like Rivera, but that's, to your point, he may be a little more technique, a little more seasoned as a technical fighter, which, you know, you have to start with technique or everything else, you know, is going to get sloppy on the outside. John Lineker, you said it, and not just the power, but the speed. I mean, the way he throws his hands and attacks with strikes, very fast, very quick to the. You hear coaches talk a lot about be first, and Lineker exemplifies that. So this should be a scrappy little fight. I love these lower weight classes. When I'm calling fights out here in Arizona, my favorite thing is watching 35ers and 45ers because there's so much speed and technique. It's almost like MMA on fast forward is something I say a lot. So I enjoy these lower weight divisions. You got a lot of experience between these guys, too. You're talking 50 fights, so no one's going in there going to be overwhelmed or outmatched or outclassed. Should be a competitive matchup. I'm going to lean towards Rivera for a decision. I think that he will probably weather the storm of Lineker and be able to do some damage of his own and control the fight.
I'm with you. And, I'm really hoping that he pulls it off because I think a fight between him and TJ Dillashaw brings a lot of new kind of flavor to the bantamweight division. I mean, Lineker fought Dillashaw a while back. Yeah. Dillashaw got the W. So I would like to see that, after Dillashaw goes down and tries to get that 125 title, which normally I'm not a fan of that. Like, I didn't like when McGregor, moved up. But I like this because I know TJ Dillashaw will defend both titles. Like, I know he will. He's the type of guy that would do that. And I think a fight between him and Mighty Mouse is just, Mighty Mouse, I get where he's coming from. He's saying, it's hard to call it a super fight if he's going to get paid the same amount as a fight with Sergio Pettis or somebody like that. So I get his point. But just in terms of a fan's perspective, that is definitely a super fight. That's something that I think... for 2018, we got a lot of blockbuster fights coming down the pipe. That might be, I want to say, the second best one next to Francis Ngannou and Stipe Miocic, which has been announced for January. That's going to be fucking crazy. But, yeah, dude, I'm pumped for that, man. UFC 220, man, it's got 2 title fights. The light heavyweight title fight and the heavyweight title fight is the main event. How sick is that?
Craziness. And you mentioned, not to tangent off in another direction.
Yeah.
TJ and Mighty Mouse, I mean, that's an amazing fight. And I had read an interesting little thread today that started on Facebook. Some local kid that I know named Andy Perez, great friend of mine. I've been watching his career for a while, but he's a little salty. He's like, these promoters are trying to lowball me. I'm putting my life, blood, sweat, and tears into this fucking training, and everyone's trying to nickel and dime me over here. But it started a very valid and interesting discussion about, well, promoters aren't necessarily making money hand over fist. Not everybody can be the UFC or Bellator. Some promoters are losing money, and that's why they have to lowball fighters because they can barely pay them to get in the case in the first place. And a fighter got in there on the feet, another guy that I know very well, Kyle Stewart, and he said something very interesting to me in contrast to what Mighty Mouse said. And again, I mean, these guys are making a living. I get it. They're running gyms. And at that level at the UFC, they have to get paid. And Mighty Mouse is a champion that really is sadly overlooked, I think, from the organization. So I get it. I'm not trying to make light of that at all. But one of the things that really stood out to me was Kid Kyle, said, the money's always a byproduct to me. I like to compete. I like to fight. I like to get in there and get better and better because I know that eventually the real reward is not making $250 to show up and $100 to win at a local show. It's being given a platform to showcase myself so that maybe the Bellator guys get a look at me so I can go over there and make some money. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Not all these guys are driven financially, for what they do. So, I get where Mighty Mouse is coming from, but what a great fight for your legacy, which is already outstanding, that if you could beat the 35-pound champion as a 25er, when the last time you fought at 35, you lost to Dominic Cruz. So I get it. I like it. I like that fight a lot. And I don't mean to digress from that, but
no worries.
That's interesting to hear.
Dude, me too, man. I'm the same thing. Like, I think if he can get past Dillashaw, you can't. There's no more question marks because that was always the question mark. It was like, well, he couldn't beat champion at 135, so that's why they made flyweight, and he's been dominating. Which is a silly argument because he only lost to Dominic Cruz, which Dominic Cruz, one of the best 35ers of all time, still is, So, and there was a big difference there in reach and things like that, which, I think that definitely was something to look at. But yeah, if he gets past Dillashaw, how can you deny this guy as the GOAT, the greatest of all time? But anyway, man, talking about this UFC, exactly, this next fight on this 219 card, man, the co-main event. This fight has me so excited, man. Like, Khabib Nurmagomedov, I can't believe I just pronounced his last name correctly, against Edson Barboza. This is the kind of fight that, like, watching this fight take place, it feels like fireworks are going to go off across the country without anybody lighting them. That's how crazy this fight is going to be. You know, you got Khabib, who's like something like 24-0 in his entire career. He's the guy, in my opinion, that poses the most threat to guys like Tony Ferguson and Conor McGregor. I think he's a tough matchup for both of those guys. But he's going against a dude in Barboza who, in my opinion, when you're talking about the best pure stand-up fighter, best pure striker in the lightweight division, it's got to be Edson Barboza. And I think it's really interesting because when we look back at when Khabib fought Michael Johnson rocked Khabib early on in that fight. But Michael Johnson, he's got some power in his hands, but he's not really known for his stand-up. And then, of course, Khabib took him down and beat the absolute fuck out of him. That was a massacre. But, you know, it's interesting because it's like, how is he going to do against a striker like Barboza? Like, can Barboza nullify his takedowns and make it a stand-up fight? Because that would be ideal for Barboza. I think he would definitely win that fight if he can do that. But, man, I think Khabib, he's going to take Barboza down. I think he's going to it's going to be an onslaught. He's going to what he did to Michael Johnson, and he was pissed off in that fight. He was like, listen, I'm tired of being overlooked. I'm tired of the UFC not giving me my just due. And I think it's been built up even more so. I mean, obviously, he had that issue with the weight cut, and that was his own doing. But now I think he still has that same kind of like chip on his shoulder, but maybe even more so. That's dangerous. I think he might really do some damage to Barboza. I'm going with Khabib. I'm going to say a second round TKO stoppage. What about you, man? This is definitely, like I said, this is an exciting co-main event. I can't wait for it.
This fight is main event worthy.
Yeah.
I really like both of these guys for different reasons. Edson Barboza is so flashy, and I don't mean like Anthony Pettis flashy. I mean like strong, effective technique flashy. Wheel kicks, things like that come out of nowhere and just destroy human beings. So Edson Barboza is a fucking killer, dude. And every time he fights, it's don't blink TV, don't get up to grab a beer, make sure that you're paying attention. You know, and replay's our best friend because he's done some spectacular things inside the cage. With that said, you look across at the other corner and you've got Khabib Nurmagomedov. Jesus, dude, this is one of those people that he's like, who's the guy? I never can remember anybody's goddamn name. The guy with carrot top hair that just retired from ONE FC. What the hell's his name? Ben Askren. The crazy afro.
Ben Askren.
Thank you. I was trying to say Ben Henderson. I know it's not him.
Yeah.
No, Ben Askren. He's got that type of talent. Does Nurmagomedov where, listen, I'm going to do what I want to do to you, and if you don't stop it, it's going to happen. And I'm going to continue to do it to you until you either quit fighting or the bell rings and they pull me off of you. That's what Khabib can do to people and do to high-level people. So when you talk about guys like that, George St. Pierre comes to mind. You know what he's going to do. You spend 90 days preparing to stop him from doing it. And then you get in there, and in the first minute, you're on your back looking up at the light, and he's elbowing you in the face. You're like, what the fuck did I do in the last 3 months of my life? That's Khabib Nurmagomedov. So, exciting fight? Absolutely. Would I like to see some diversity thrown into Khabib's career? Would I like to see, per Matt Betzel's comment last week, see him face some adversity, pick himself up off the mat, and then maybe be better prepared to compete for a title? I think that would be great for his career, and it might be entertaining to watch him evolve from that. But I don't think it's going to happen. I'm with you. I'm seeing either a TKO of Barboza on his back getting pounded out, or a decision to go to Nurmagomedov. One way or the other, I think he's going to get his hand raised. But I would love to see Edson get off and be able to land some strikes. But it's weird. You start contrasting a guy who throws his legs around a lot to a guy who loves to grapple and wrestle. You're playing into his strength, and even though your strength is what it is, your strength makes his strength stronger. So I just feel like the deck's stacked against Barboza in this fight.
That's actually a really good point, because when you look at Barboza's game, most of his offense comes from his kicks. And like you said, you throw a lot of kicks against wrestlers, you're just opening yourself up to be taken down. So maybe he doesn't throw a lot of kicks here, and he tries to box with Khabib. He's got good hands, but I think Khabib can get in. Yeah. He can get in there now, because the kicks would kind of kind of keep that distance, right? So Khabib could get in and get that takedown. I think style-wise, it's a good fight for Khabib to look very impressive against the number 3 guy in the division. But, speaking of fireworks, speaking of crazy fights, we got the main event here. Holy shit. UFC Women's Featherweight Champ Cris Cyborg Justino defending her title against Holly Holm, former UFC Women's Bantamweight Champ that's, going back up to Featherweight to try to get that second title. I can't wait for this fight. I've been wanting to see this one for a very, very long time. Cyborg, nobody has been able to stop or nullify her power. She's got power in that division she's stronger than guys that compete in her weight class in the males featherweight division. Like, I think she can go in there and knock some of those fucking guys out cold. But she's going up against Holly Holm, who is a phenomenal stand-up fighter. She comes from a great boxing pedigree, great kickboxer, and she's just so good at when she has a game plan and sticking to that game plan, picking fighters apart. She's one of the best at it. Now, I remember when Cyborg fought. It was a Muay Thai fight for the organization known as Lion Fights, which they do shows out in Las Vegas, which is primarily Muay Thai. And she fought some girl, and I wish I could remember the name of the girl because the girl actually beat her and kind of showed a lot of weaknesses that Cyborg had at the time. Now, granted, this was a couple years back, so, things change. But I think, the blueprint was put into effect. If Cyborg goes in there against a really, really good striker that's also strong, also powerful, which Holly is, I think there's a chance there that we could see Cyborg put in some danger. This is what I think is going to happen. I think it's going to be a classic bull versus the matador type of thing. Cyborg's going to rush after her. Holly's going to be able to use her footwork and kind of keep her at bay. I think she drags this thing into like the 4th round, and I think Holly Holm lands a head kick and knocks her the fuck out. Shocks the world, gets the second title. First woman in history to win 2 titles in 2 different weight classes. Todd, what do you think, man? Am I off my fucking rocker, or do you see this happening as well?
There was a time that had you said that about Ronda Rousey, people would have crucified you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There was a time where people, Holly Holm, great, another person for Ronda Rousey to practice her armbar skills on. How many minutes, 2 rounds later, Rousey's knocked out cold, looking at people like, what the fuck just happened? And Holly Holm's got a strap around her waist. So, are you off your rocker? Absolutely not. One thing that I'll say is, when you look at someone like Holly Holm challenging Cris Cyborg, Holly Holm's not the type of person that's going to... Remember we talked about Mike Tyson? Some people were beat before they walked out to the ring.
Yeah.
With Cris Cyborg, I've seen so many women standing in their corner, and the referee's like, are you ready? And there's a look on their face like, I guess so. Let's do it. Let's get this over with. And I don't think that's Holly Holm. And she's got Winklejohn, one of the best striking coaches in the business, in her corner, coaching her up. So he's going to break down Cris Cyborg and what Cris Cyborg does very well for her. He's going to give her the tools she needs to compete with Cris Cyborg. She's already got the talent, but, game plans are huge. I mean, you hear someone like Dominic Cruz, who's a mastermind discuss MMA, and he and Eric Del Fierro are some of the smartest people I've ever heard in my life talk about MMA, and it's always around the game plan. Some people don't game plan. I hear fighters say that all the time. But the successful fighters that I see, they take it very seriously. So, Holly Holm's going to come in there prepared, capable, and willing. But then you've got this aura and mystique of Cris Cyborg. She's got that Anderson Silva factor, that invincibility. Like you said, I mean, there are some examples where she's been dismantled or what have you, but it's Cris Cyborg. She's a wrecking machine. So you expect this tornado of terror to come across the cage and overwhelm somebody. That's not going to happen with Holly. So is Cris going to be able to kind of pull that back a little bit and realize that she's not necessarily a lock to win? I mean, she goes into so many of these fights just ready to dominate. She's got to know that she's not going to go in and dominate Holly Holm, or at least she shouldn't expect to. Maybe she will. Who knows? But she shouldn't expect that to be the case in this fight. This is this is the hardest, most competitive fight she'll ever have in her career. So, man, it's, for me more, this is one of those, I'm not real worried about the outcome. I'm curious to see how we get there, because what happens in between the first bell and that final, someone getting their hand raised, it's going to be spectacular, no matter which way it cuts. I'm gonna lean towards tradition. I'm gonna go with Cyborg, TKO, KO, just because there's so much confidence there. And I don't know. It's just I guess that's just the easy pick for me, as far as like just kind of half-assing it in the sense that it's Cris freaking Cyborg. I just expect her to do more of the same. But again, you nailed it, man. I mean, Holly's gonna play the matador, right? She's gonna let her come in, and she's gonna spin it and twist it around so that she's able to use her tools and weapons and maybe upset her. So it'll be fun either way.
Absolutely. And for the record, the fighter that beat Cyborg in Muay Thai, her name is Jorina Bars. Very high-level K1 Muay Thai fighter. She's based out there in the Netherlands, which is known for their kickboxing. And I believe she's actually, she's undefeated, it looks like, in Muay Thai. So definitely no shame losing to a girl like that.
Wow.
This girl's a killer. The interesting thing is, though, looking at her MMA record, she's like 1-3. So she hasn't been able to kind of carry over that same success. But her last fight was in 2013 in MMA, and she still believes she's still active in kickboxing. Yeah, her last fight was this year in kickboxing, Muay Thai. But yeah, it should be very interesting. Now here's an interesting take on it. That women's featherweight division, aside from Cyborg, aside from Holly, who still kind of goes back and forth between 135 and 145, and aside from maybe, who were some of the other girls they had Cyborg fight? They had her fight the Invicta FC bantamweight champ who came up, and then also they were trying to get her to fight Megan Anderson, who's in Invicta FC, but there's not a lot of girls in that weight class. And it's funny, like you look at the UFC official rankings, which are garbage. I talk about this a lot. Their rankings suck, but they don't even have rankings for women's featherweight. And they have the flyweight. They actually just posted the women's flyweight rankings. They just recently launched that division with Tough 26. So, of course, they got a lot of girls in that division. But it's funny because they've had this featherweight title now for over a year. And they're still, like, you look at the website, it goes, rankings are not available for this division. It's like, it's really kind of crazy. It's like it was just created for Cyborg because she can't make 35. She's a big star, so you want to obviously capitalize on that. But I'm thinking, man, like, if Holly Holm pulls this off, and let's say Cyborg is like, all right, I'm retiring after this, or I'm not coming back to the UFC, I'm going to do other stuff, what do they do? Like, does Holly, does she retire the title and go back down to 35, and then they retire that weight class, and they focus on the divisions that they have, or do they try to bring in more girls at 45? Because they're out there, but just tough, man. What do you think, man? What do you think of that division? Because it is kind of shallow,
It's been, and you bring up an interesting point, and I never had considered it. Have we ever seen the UFC, do away with a division? I don't know that we have. So that would be somewhat of a step back, I would think. But you got to imagine they've got to have an ace up their sleeve, at least from a game plan standpoint, where you wouldn't open that up just for 1 or 2 fights for Cyborg and not have some sort of idea or scouts out there looking at 45 girls that you could bring in. You know what I mean? They're out there, and we talked about this before, and I know we're wrapping up here, but we talked about how Ronda Rousey kind of put a handcuff to the women's MMA as a whole because she was the driving force, right?
Right.
So she was 135 pounds. So if you wanted to compete in women's MMA, you kind of had to fight at 135 pounds because that's the only opportunity you had to really do it unless you were in a fringe organization that had special matchups. But from a UFC standpoint, you fought at 35, you didn't fight at all. Now that's changing, I get it. But some of these girls that were fighting at 35 maybe are not that suited at that weight. Maybe there's 155-pound girls that might be willing to be more disciplined and get down to 45. They're out there. They're fighting on the fringe organizations, the localized shows. The UFC just has to do their due diligence to go out there and get them. So I can't imagine they put the division together and let it fold, based solely on the brand of Cris Cyborg. But, I mean, what the inaugural title fight, she wasn't even involved in. So, I'd like to think that wouldn't happen, but you never know, man. I mean, you can't just, it's kind of like the Mighty Mouse. You can't just keep bouncing the same fighters off the chance, right?
Exactly. You know what? It's interesting. Like, you bring up a good point talking about, like, has the UFC ever folded a division? Now, how crazy, and we forget this because it was so long ago, but the most stacked division right now is 155 pounds, right? Remember, years and years ago, I think they disbanded that division for a couple of years because I think it was like, wasn't like Jens Pulver the first champ, or he was one of the early day like 155 champs, and I think they used to call it bantamweight. It wasn't lightweight; it was bantamweight. This is when guys like Yves Edwards were at their prime. You know, Matt Serra was fighting in that division. BJ Penn was a young guy, and I think there was some kind of issues going on that they actually disbanded it for. Yeah, Calvillo, yeah, and I think it's like a 3-year gap where they didn't have any fights or any title